CBS Young and the Restless spoilers Tuesday full September 30th, 2025. Jack and Victor making the decision to put aside decades of enmity was the kind of development that felt almost unthinkable in Genoa City, a tectonic shift that rippled across every family, business, and relationship that had been shaped by their rivalry for nearly 40 years. Their feud had been the lifeblood of so many conflicts, the defining axis around which countless other battles rotated. It had ruined marriages, bankrupted competitors, poisoned friendships, and carved fault lines into the very culture of the city. To imagine these two men, once so proud of their uncompromising hostility, standing together in even the faintest gesture of cooperation, was to acknowledge that something seismic had changed. The air of inevitability that had always surrounded their clash suddenly gave way to something different, the uneasy stillness of an armistice whose terms were written not in ink but in necessity, a necessity forged from the dangerous ambitions of Cain and the reckless schemes of Billy. For Jack, reaching out a hand toward Victor was like crossing a desert barefoot, painful, humiliating, and uncertain whether there would be water on the other side. He knew the look in Victor's eye, the glint of satisfaction that came from seeing an Abbott bend, even for strategy. Victor had always thrived on power plays, always made cooperation feel like capitulation. And yet, the alternative was worse. Cain's creeping manipulation had already begun to fracture loyalties in the business world, his ability to present himself as both victim and opportunist making him especially dangerous. Billy's self-destructive streak, meanwhile, had grown into something darker, almost pathological, threatening not only his own future but also the structural integrity of Jabot and the fragile family bonds Jack had fought so hard to preserve. For Victor, the alliance was no less distasteful. His legacy had been built on the annihilation of rivals, on demonstrating time and again that Newman Enterprises would crush anyone foolish enough to challenge its dominance. To walk into a room and extend an agreement with Jack Abbott was to undermine decades of carefully cultivated power. It was an admission that there were forces loose in Genoa City capable of destabilizing even him. Diane saw it clearly from the moment Jack told her. Her unease was not paranoia but instinct. The Abbott family, for as long as anyone could remember, had defined themselves in opposition to Newman. Their battles with Victor were as much a part of their identity as Abbott Manor, as intrinsic to their story as the fragrance empire Catherine Chancellor once fought to protect. Aligning with Victor, no matter the reason, would stain that history. It would blur the clean lines of friend and enemy, betrayer and betrayed, and in doing so risk alienating those within their family and business who could not understand why Jack would risk dancing with the devil. Yet the danger from Cain and Billy was undeniable. Cain had maneuvered himself with a patience that belied his reckless image, inserting influence into places no one thought he could reach, forming shadow alliances that allowed him to exploit weaknesses left behind by Newman and Abbott squabbles. Billy, for his part, had grown too volatile, his desire to prove himself equal or superior to Jack twisting into a reckless crusade that placed him on a collision course with disaster. Their combined presence was not something that Jack or Victor could dismantle alone, no matter how vast their resources or how deep their instincts ran. Together, however, there was a chance to neutralize the storm before it consumed them both. What made the truce between Jack and Victor extraordinary was not just the act itself, but the reverberations it set off across Genoa City. Business partners, rivals, and even family members found themselves questioning their own positions, forced to reevaluate where their loyalties lay. Was this alliance a harbinger of stability, or was it a temporary ceasefire destined to implode with twice the destruction? The uncertainty alone was enough to keep boardrooms tense and dinner tables filled with hushed arguments. Jack struggled with the weight of it in private moments. He would look at Diane, her face etched with worry, and feel the old doubts rise to the surface. Was he saving his family from a greater threat, or delivering them into Victor's hands one compromise at a time? For Victor, the calculation was colder but no less dangerous. He understood that standing beside Jack would invite whispers of weakness, that enemies who had long feared Newman might smell vulnerability. Yet his instincts also told him that allowing Cain and Billy to continue unchecked could erode the foundation of everything he had built. In Victor's mind, No insult to his pride was too great a price if it meant ensuring Newman dominance in the years to come. And so, the two men sat across from each other, decades of history heavy in the silence, and agreed. It was not a pact of friendship, not a healing of wounds, but a contract written in necessity. The scars of their battles remained, but the battlefield itself had shifted. They would march side by side, at least for now, their alliance an uneasy marriage of calculation and desperation. The city watched with bated breath, knowing that nothing in Genoa City ever remained static for long. This truce could either mark the dawn of an era of stability, or ignite a powder keg whose explosion would make every past conflict between Jack and Victor look tame by comparison. For Victor, the decision to ally himself with Jack was not simply a matter of strategy. It was a direct challenge to the image he had spent decades cultivating in Genoa City. Victor Newman had built his reputation as a ruthless, uncompromising titan, a man who never bowed, never softened, never allowed an enemy to glimpse a weakness. Every business move, every personal feud, every public declaration had reinforced that persona, until Victor himself became inseparable from the idea of dominance. And yet here he was, extending his hand to Jack Abbott, the rival he had sworn never to trust, the man he had fought through boardrooms, bedrooms, and courtrooms alike. To ally with Jack was to accept vulnerability, to admit, if only for a moment, that survival required adaptability. The stakes were no longer about pride or ego, they were about legacy, about protecting the very companies and families that had been forged in the fire of their long-standing war. Jack felt the same pressure, though it manifested differently. For him, the Abbott name had always been shadowed by Victor's looming figure, a constant reminder that Newman power could crush Abbott ambition at any moment. Every victory Jack had ever earned against Victor had come at great cost, every loss had carved deep into his sense of self. By agreeing to this alliance, Jack was not just extending a pragmatic olive branch, he was risking the very foundation of Abbott identity. Diane saw this clearly, her instincts warning that the Abbotts aligning with the Newmans would forever blur the lines between family honor and family betrayal. To her, it was not just about business but about loyalty, about the history of wounds that had defined their lives for generations. Nikki, on the other side, was equally torn. She had stood beside Victor through countless battles, defended him against the Abbotts, and built a life around their rivalry as much as their love. To see him suddenly stand shoulder to shoulder with Jack was disorienting, almost destabilizing. Loyalty demanded that she support her husband, but old scars whispered that this alliance was fragile, that it carried risks not only for Victor's empire but for their marriage itself. For both women, the truce forced them into a liminal space where devotion collided with suspicion, where past grievances pressed against the promise of survival. And then there was Billy. Reckless, restless Billy, who had never been able to resist the lure of control even when it burned him. For so long, Billy had thrived in the chaos created by the Newman-Abbott rivalry, exploiting cracks and weaknesses, leveraging his role as the black sheep into opportunities for influence. But now, with Jack and Victor united, those cracks began to seal. The chaos narrowed into a dangerous stillness that left Billy cornered, his choices fewer, his risks greater. He found himself reacting instead of instigating, watching as the fragile alliance pressed against his usual freedom of movement. The walls he had always known how to climb suddenly became higher, sharper, more impenetrable. For a man like Billy, accustomed to defining himself in opposition to Jack's restraint and Victor's dominance, the new order felt like a trap, and the more trapped he felt, the more volatile he became. Kane, meanwhile, had been counting on division. His manipulations relied on the fault lines between Newman and Abbott, on the arrogance that each man would refuse to cooperate with the other. He had built his schemes on the certainty that Victor's pride and Jack's bitterness were immutable constants. To see those two constants suddenly rewritten was to watch his carefully constructed house of cards wobble under an unexpected gust of wind. He had calculated for stubbornness, for ego, for history, but not for survival-driven adaptation. And in that miscalculation lay danger. Kane's ambition, once so quietly effective, began to look exposed, his movements more desperate, his plans less assured. The new alliance did not erase his influence, but it did put him in the crosshairs of two of the most powerful men Genoa City had ever known. Still, beneath the uneasy partnership, the unspoken question gnawed at everyone: how long could it last? Victor and Jack were not men built for trust. They were men shaped by betrayal, sharpened by decades of scorched earth competition. No matter how much necessity pressed them together, history had a way of resurfacing. Old grudges did not dissolve simply because the present demanded cooperation. They lingered like embers, ready to ignite at the first sign of weakness. Every meeting between them, no matter how civil on the surface, was laced with suspicion. Every promise carried the weight of doubt. In Genoa City, alliances were as brittle as glass, and few could imagine this one surviving unscathed. The city itself seemed to vibrate with the shift. Boardrooms whispered with speculation, shareholders braced for impact, and families at dinner tables debated whether the world they had known for decades was unraveling. The rivalry between Victor and Jack had been a defining constant, and without it the ground felt unfamiliar, unstable. Some saw the truce as a chance for peace, others as a ticking time bomb. Either way, no one could ignore it. The balance of power had been upended, and every player, from Nikki and Diane to Kane and Billy, was forced to recalculate their next move in a game whose rules had suddenly changed. The fragile new order that Genoa City had been forced to accept with Jack and Victor's alliance did not unfold quietly, for it set in motion a cascade of personal crises, dangerous gambits, and emotional revelations that touched nearly every family. Billy, never one to accept constraint, stunned even those who thought they knew him best when he issued a threat so shocking that it reverberated through both his professional prospects and his personal relationships. His words carried the dangerous weight of a man who had nothing left to lose, a man cornered by shifting alliances and suffocating expectations, willing to set fire to the very bridges that had once carried him forward. It was not simply reckless posturing, it was a clear warning that Billy was prepared to destabilize everything, to drag down those closest to him if it meant regaining even a sliver of control. For Jack, already under strain from the alliance with Victor, Billy's volatility was both heartbreaking and terrifying, for it meant that the enemy was not only outside the family walls but within them, threatening to shatter the Abbott foundation from the inside. Yet in the midst of chaos, Kane found a fleeting sense of peace, an unexpected reprieve when he reconnected with Tracy. Their encounter reminded him of gentler times, of the possibility that compassion and wisdom could soften ambition's sharp edges. Tracy, with her enduring patience and boundless empathy, listened without judgment, offering him a space to breathe in a city where everyone else demanded constant maneuvering. For Kane, who had been living on a razor's edge of schemes and manipulations, Tracy's words offered both solace and the uncomfortable mirror of truth, forcing him to consider not only what he wanted to achieve but what it would cost him if he continued on his destructive path. Elsewhere, Tessa opened herself to Daniel in a way she rarely allowed, exposing the raw, unfiltered emotions she had kept locked inside. Their conversation unfolded not as strategy but as confession, a gentle exchange that revealed the depths of their friendship and the possibility of something more. Daniel's willingness to listen without judgment, to offer support without condition, gave Tessa the kind of grounding she desperately needed. In that moment, a seed was planted, not necessarily of romance, but of renewal, of a new chapter where vulnerability could be transformed into strength. It was a reminder that even in Genoa City, where power and betrayal dominated, there were still spaces for genuine connection and healing. But while some were finding comfort, others sharpened their claws. Sally and Audra, both bruised by losses but never broken, quietly conspired together, their shared determination forging them into a formidable pair. They understood the value of patience and secrecy, the advantage of striking when others were distracted by more obvious dramas. Their whispered plans hinted at a reclamation of power, a hunger to seize back what had been denied them, and their partnership promised to be one that could rival even the most established power brokers. Genoa City had long underestimated both women, dismissing them as secondary players, but together Sally and Audra radiated the dangerous energy of predators waiting for the right moment to pounce. Meanwhile, Claire found herself blindsided by an invitation from Holden to Los Angeles, a proposition that glimmered with opportunity but also uncertainty. For someone still carving out her place in Genoa City, the chance to step into a new orbit was both thrilling and unsettling. The offer forced her to confront questions about loyalty, identity, and what she truly wanted from her future. Victoria, ever the strategist, inserted herself into the situation with Kyle, offering advice about Claire that he neither asked for nor welcomed. Her words, cutting in their clarity, struck him as meddling, yet he could not shake the lingering thought that perhaps she was not entirely wrong. For Kyle, who was already weighed down by the expectations of his family name and the complexities of his relationships, Victoria's intervention forced him to reflect on choices he would rather not analyze, leaving him both frustrated and reluctantly contemplative. All of these developments intertwined with the uneasy alliance between Jack and Victor, amplifying the sense that Genoa City was perched on the edge of transformation. The partnership that had shocked the city into silence continued to cast a long shadow, shaping every move, every decision. For Billy, it intensified his sense of isolation, pushing him further into dangerous territory. For Kane, it forced him to rethink his strategy, even as Tracy's kindness pulled him back toward humanity. For Tessa and Daniel, it created space for vulnerability in a world too often defined by ruthless ambition. For Sally and Audra, it opened cracks they could exploit, reminding them that power was never static. For Claire, it stirred questions about identity and belonging, while Victoria's interference exposed the complex web of influence that bound the city together. And through it all, the same question pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the surface: how long could Jack and Victor hold this together before history, pride, or betrayal tore it apart? The answer would determine not only their legacies but the fate of everyone caught in the storm they had unwillingly unleashed.